So good morning, Representative Hughes. Thanks so much for doing this interview with us at Disability Rights Louisiana. The purpose of these interviews are to give residents with disabilities an informed vote when they go to the polls. So before I get started with my questions, would you take a second or two to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, good morning, and thank you all for doing this. I'm really excited about our conversation this morning. I'm Jason Hughes. I currently serve as the state representative for House District 100, where I've served for the past 6 years. Currently also vice chair of the Appropriations Committee, which, as you know, is a very important committee where we have oversight of the state's budget and appropriations process. Throughout my tenure, I have been known as a bold advocate, taking on everything from slumlords, child predators. I have been a staunch advocate for education and literacy. And so, I'm running now for City Council District E after 18 months of careful consideration because I'm really excited to roll up my sleeves and help move District E forward. And so, looking forward to our conversation and looking forward to our dialogue and questions.
Thank you so much for everything you do and continue to do for our
Thank you.
residents. So my first question, what steps would you take to make New Orleans infrastructure and public spaces more accessible to all residents? And how would you ensure that residents with disabilities are at the table when decisions are being made about the city's built environment?
Yeah, great question. As I ride around District E in particular, but obviously this is an issue citywide, but my first and foremost focus is going to be District E, so New Orleans East and the Lower Ninth Ward. One thing that I've been sounding the alarm about during my 6-year tenure in the House, and we've started some work in that now in District 100, but it needs to be expanded. Number one is just accessibility. When we look at sidewalks and the lack of sidewalks throughout our city and throughout District E, that certainly poses a problem for our residents, including our residents with disabilities. Along our service road corridors, in New Orleans East, for example, where you have a Walmart, far too often I see residents, on motorized wheelchairs, for example, or motorized scooters that are actually in lanes of traffic due to the lack of sidewalks. When they're trying to catch an RTA bus, the sidewalk infrastructure is incomplete and it forces residents into lanes of traffic. And so it has certainly a profound impact on our residents with disabilities. So making our city, making District E, but making our entire city accessible to everyone, top priority. As we look at infrastructure upgrades to our park and recreation centers, playgrounds, when we install playground equipment, we have to be more intentional in ensuring that all residents, if you have a disability, if you don't have a disability, that all residents have access to that playground equipment. I noticed that Kenner just installed a new $1 million playground equipment center, and it's accessible to all. And that's how we need to think, in the city of New Orleans. And I would also encourage our mayor, as appointments are made to critical boards and commissions. I had the opportunity to serve on the New Orleans City Planning Commission, for example. But when you look at the City Planning Commission, Zoning Commission, and other important commissions, I think that it will be important to have representation from our disability community on key boards and commissions that are making, land use, zoning, and design decisions.
Great. And how will you support economic opportunity for residents with disabilities? What steps would you take to ensure that jobs across the city are truly inclusive and equitable?
Yeah, absolutely. Throughout my 6-year tenure in the House, I've always pushed, state government, for example, but have certainly encouraged, nonprofits, private sector, to really cast a wide net for employment and, to ensure that the necessary accommodations are in place. Lighthouse for the Blind, for example, has done a great job placing residents with sight disability into jobs. And so certainly within city government, which I would have jurisdiction over, as a city council member would ensure that when we are casting a wide net for employees, that we are certainly ensuring that the disability community has an equal and fair opportunity not only to apply and to be considered, but that the necessary accommodations are in place throughout city government for members of our disability community.
Thank you. What is your vision for ensuring that residents with disabilities can access safe, affordable, and accessible housing in every neighborhood in the city? And how would you address both affordability and physical accessibility in housing policies?
Yeah, great question. Housing affordability, is certainly at the top of mind for many of our residents, not just renters, but homeowners as well. Many of our homeowners in the city of New Orleans are becoming outpriced from living in their homes, or many people that aspire to buy a home, are having challenges. A lot of that is due, in particular parts of our city, to the current state of homeowners insurance and the price of homeowners insurance. And so, we're certainly continuing to make that a priority at the state level, but we're going to need our federal government to be a partner in that as well. One thing that I would like to do, and I've talked openly throughout this campaign, is to leverage the Housing Trust Fund to help residents, number one, that are currently in homes. I would like to see residents at a certain income threshold be able to leverage the Housing Trust Fund to fortify their roofs. We know for a fact that if a resident fortifies their roof, that certainly drives the cost of homeowners insurance down. But we can also explore utilizing the Housing Trust Fund for our residents with disabilities to make certain renovations or accommodations to their homes. I was very proud this past legislative session, for example, to expand housing choice waivers for our senior citizens that may need ramps, for example, if they're confined to a wheelchair, or other accommodations within showers, et cetera. And we were able to include that in the budget, working with Chair Jack McFarland. So that is something I'd like to replicate at the city level, utilizing Housing Trust Fund dollars for our disability community to ensure not only that they can be homeowners, but that they can comfortably stay in their home and maneuver throughout their home.
Thank you. How would you work to expand access to mental health care in New Orleans, particularly community-based services? And what role do you see the city playing in preventing incarceration of people with mental health conditions?
Yeah, great question. Mental and behavioral health, it has to be top of mind for the city of New Orleans, and the city's going to have to put some skin in the game, no question about it. We cannot rely solely on the federal government, certainly during these precarious times. And we most certainly cannot rely solely on state government, even though, to state government's credit, mental and behavioral health has now become a bipartisan priority. But here in the city of New Orleans, $1.8 billion budget, our budget must reflect our priorities. And I think, certainly when we think about incarceration, we have a lot of citizens that are probably in Orleans Parish Prison that probably should not be there if we would have just simply been proactive in having the appropriate treatment relative to mental and behavioral health. And so that is top of mind. I serve on the Board of Commissioners for New Orleans East Hospital. We just completed a 5-year strategic plan. And one of the areas that New Orleans East Hospital is moving into will be a center of excellence around mental and behavioral health. Look, mental and behavioral health touches all of us, either directly or indirectly. And so it's high time that the city of New Orleans makes mental and behavioral health treatment a priority. It touches every resident. And when we look at our homeless population, for example, many of our homeless residents are suffering from mental illness. If you simply house them without the appropriate wraparound services, the odds of them being homeless again is pretty high. And so very passionate about mental and behavioral health. Not only do I serve on the Appropriations Committee, I currently serve on the Health and Welfare Committee, where I'm a senior member. And a year ago, under the leadership of Lori Schlegel. She had a mental health subcommittee that she chaired. I was honored to serve as a member of that. And so, that has been a key focus of mine as not only an appropriator, but senior member of health and welfare, and will certainly be a priority of mine on the New Orleans City Council.
Thank you. And for our last question, this goes along the same lines, but how would you advocate for more equitable access to Medicaid and other healthcare supports for residents with disabilities in New Orleans? And what types of policies would you support or oppose?
Yeah, well, look, I will continue, and as a city council member, I still plan to spend a lot of time in Baton Rouge, fighting to ensure that Medicaid is protected, and that we do all that we can to ensure that when we have the opportunity to expand certain services under Medicaid, that we're able to do that, but certainly to preserve what we have. One thing at the city level that we need to be more intentional about is working with our nonprofit entities, working with our churches, ensuring that these are hubs, number one, to ensure that members of our community that may have lost access to Medicaid for whatever reason, right now, a lot of people during the re-eligibility period are losing access to Medicaid, not because they don't qualify, but because many of our Medicaid recipients are very mobile. And so they may miss the eligibility notice that comes in the mail. And when they show up for a wellness visit, they find out that they're dropped. And so I want our libraries, our churches, our other nonprofit entities to be centers where we can partner with our city's health department for citizens to come and be able to reapply and get reconfirmed, because that re-eligibility process is very, very cumbersome. And so a lot of our residents, our disability community, and other residents will often throw up their hands because of the red tape and bureaucracy just to requalify. So I'm very passionate about this. These are conversations that I've already had, that I've already started. And that's one key area where our city can play regarding Medicaid.
We do understand that you have very little time during this election season, so we want to thank you again for taking the time out to speak with us this morning. That is all for my questions, but do you have anything else to add that we didn't cover?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the conversation, and I have all the time that you need, so don't feel a need to rush me. No worries at all. But oftentimes we hear our leaders in the city of New Orleans say that New Orleans is an inclusive city. But when we talk about inclusivity, that has to apply to everyone. In our disability community, we have to be very intentional, ensuring that our disability community is at the table. That when our disability community speaks, we're taking their voices very serious. And infrastructure is at the top of everybody's mind, and so we have to be intentional when we're doing design review and construction that we are truly building the city that is inclusive to everyone. Very passionate about that. I've been very passionate about it throughout my career, and will certainly be intentional about it as a member of the New Orleans City Council.
Thank you so much, Rep. Hughes. I'm gonna end the recording now, and then we can chat a little bit about
So,
anything else you might want to talk about.
okay.